Welcome dear students to yet another class on the history of English literature. We are discussing the Victorian novelists. We have already discussed Charles Dickens, the different novels of Charles Dickens. We have discussed George Eliot, the different novels of George Eliot. And in our discussion today, in our class today, we shall discuss another important Victorian novelist, a late Victorian novelist, Thomas Hardy. Now, Thomas Hardy was a late Victorian novelist who lived from 1840 to 1928. Now, Thomas Hardy was one of the most prominent late or later Victorian novelists. He was born in 1840, as I said, and lived up to 1928. So, later, most prominent of the later Victorian novelists. Now, who was he? Thomas Hardy was an English novelist and he was a poet. He was a Victorian novelist and he was a realist. He was a realist. Now, who is a realist? Realist is a person who accepts and deals with things as they are. A realist artist, who is a realist artist or who is a realist writer. He will describe people and things as they are in real life. Now, George Eliot also used realism in her novels. So, Thomas Hardy was a realist. Thomas Hardy also was influenced much by romanticism in his novels. So, he was a realist and he was influenced by romanticism. Thomas Hardy was influenced much by romanticism in his novels as well as in his poetry. Though Thomas Hardy wrote short stories, poems, plays and novels, he is best known for his novels. So, he is best known for his novels. His last novels, Tess of the dUrbervilles and Jude the Obscure, are considered to be the best of his novels. His best novels are Tess of the dUrbervilles and Jude the Obscure. When we talk about Thomas Hardy, we also should talk about the background of his novels. The background of Hardy's novels is the semi-fictional land of Wessex. Semi-fictional land of Wessex. So we must remember this background of the novels of Thomas Hardy. The background is the semi-fictional land of Wessex. Thomas Hardy set all his novels, all his major novels, in the south and southwest of England. He named the south and the southwest area of England as Wessex. Why did he name as Wessex? Now, how did he decide to give that name, Wessex? Now, it was named after the medieval Anglo-Saxon kingdom. The medieval Anglo-Saxon kingdom that existed in this part of that country prior to the unification of England. So, it was the medieval Anglo-Saxon kingdom that existed in this particular area before the unification of England. Thus, the background of Hardy's novels is the semi-fictional land of Wessex. Please remember that, the semi-fictional land of Wessex. Geographically, Wessex comprised six old countries in South England. Which are they? Dorset, Wiltshire, Somerset, Devon, Hampshire, and much of Berkshire. It comprised some parts of Oxfordshire as well. So, these are the countries that consisted the Wessex. And Wessex was an inseparable part of Hardy's life. There is a close relationship between Hardy and Wessex. That is why the background is set as the semi-fictional land of Wessex. It was his place of birth. For Thomas Hardy, Wessex was a place of birth. It was a place of his childhood and the place of his youthful love. Another important characteristic we must remember is that the Thomas Hardy novels were trendsetters. How they were trendsetters? They were trendsetters for regional novels. Trendsetters for regional novels. Now, Wessex was a region, and Hardy's Wessex novels set the trend for the regional novels in England, in English. So, Hardy's Wessex novels set the trend for the regional novels in English. The regional novel, what is it? The regional novel is a genre of fiction that is set in a recognizable region. It describes features distinguishing the life, the social situations, customs, language, dialect or other aspects of the culture of that area and that people. So that is a regional novel. It describes the customs, relations, languages, dialect and other aspects of the area and the people. Now my dear students, we shall have a short description of the different novels of Thomas Hardy. Please remember the names and the year of publication of the different novels of Thomas Hardy, the later Victorian, the most important later Victorian novelist. The first novel by Thomas Hardy is The Poor Man and the Lady. The Poor Man and the Lady. Now, this novel was written by Thomas Hardy in 1867. It was written in 1867, but this novel was never published. Why the novel was never published? Because the manuscript was rejected by the publishers at least 5 times. Even though the novel was written in 1867, this novel was never published because the manuscript was rejected by the publishers. The second novel by Thomas Hardy is Desperate Remedies. Desperate Remedies was published in 1871. And this was the second novel by Thomas Hardy and the first to be published. So this is the first novel of Thomas Hardy, Desperate Remedies. It was the first one to be published. It was anonymously released by Tinsley Brothers. So it was published anonymously. The third novel by Thomas Hardy is Under the Greenwood Tree. Under the Greenwood Tree, which was published in 1872. Now, this was the second novel to be published. The third novel by Thomas Hardy and the second one to be published. This novel also was published anonymously. This was the first of his series of Wessex novels. So this is a novel which has got its background setting, Wessex, the semi-fictional land of Wessex. The fourth novel by Thomas Hardy is A Pair of Blue Eyes. A Pair of Blue Eyes was published in 1873. Now this was the third published novel by Thomas Hardy. Now this novel was published in his own name. So this novel was published in his own name. The term cliffhanger is considered to have originated with this novel, cliffhanger. The plot device of cliffhanger was popularized by Charles Dickens. Now, cliffhanger is a type of narrative in which the end is very abrupt, fast ending. The cliffhanger is a type of narrative in which the end is very abrupt. The fifth novel by Thomas Hardy was Far from the Madding Crowd. Far from the Madding Crowd, which was published in 1874. And this was Hardy's fourth novel to be published and it was a literary success. He revised the text in 1895 and made further changes in 1901. So that was the fourth published novel of Thomas Hardy. The sixth novel of Thomas Hardy was The Return of the Native. The Return of the Native was published in 1878. Now this novel had some controversial themes. The Return of the Native, which was published in 1878. The seventh novel by Thomas Hardy was The Trumpet Major. The Trumpet Major was published in 1880. Now this is the only historical novel of Thomas Hardy. The Trumpet Major, the only historical novel of Thomas Hardy. The eighth novel that was published by Thomas Hardy was Two on a Tar. Two on a Tar. It was published in 1882. Now, this is a minor work by Thomas Hardy. He classified this novel as romance and fantasy. Two on a Tar. This was classified as a romance and fantasy. The ninth novel by Thomas Hardy is The Mayor of Casterbridge. The Mayor of Casterbridge, which was published in 1886. Now this novel is set in a fictional rural England with Casterbridge standing for Dorchester in Dorset, where the author spent his youth. So Casterbridge stands for Dorchester in Dorset, and this is a place where Thomas Hardy spent his youth. The 10th novel by Thomas Hardy was The Woodlanders, 1887. It was published in 1887. This is also one of the Wessex novels of Thomas Hardy, and the story takes place in a small woodland village called Little Hindock. Woodland village called Little Hintock. The 11th novel by Thomas Hardy is Tess of the dUrbervilles. It was published in 1891. Tess of the dUrbervilles, published in 1891. Now this novel is considered as a major 19th century novel. It's a big success. It is also considered as a masterpiece of Thomas Hardy, the best work of Thomas Hardy. It was received with mixed reviews when it first appeared, partly because it challenged the sexual morals of the Victorian period. So that was the Tess of dUrbervilles was the masterpiece of Thomas Hardy. The 12th novel by Thomas Hardy was The Wellbeloved, a sketch of a temperament. The Wellbeloved, a sketch of a temperament, which was published in 1892. And this novel, The Wellbeloved, tells the story of a sculptor in search of an ideal woman. The search of a sculptor, or the story of a sculptor in search of an ideal woman. The 13th novel by Thomas Hardy was called Jude the Obscure, which was published in 1895. Jude the Obscure. Now this is Thomas Hardy's last completed novel. This novel is concerned in particular with issues of class, issues of education, issues of religion, morality and marriage. So this is the last completed novel, Jude the Obscure, last completed novel. Now my dear students, we shall discuss about some of the characteristics of Hardy's novels. Now, nature in Hardy's novel. We should say something about nature in Hardy's novel. Now, nature was a leading character. The novels of Thomas Hardy, nature was a leading character and not a mere background in his novels. Nature was a character. In Hardy's fiction, the natural world is often described in great detail. Nature was a character. The nature is given more importance or more significance than mere setting of the narrative. It is not mere background. Nature is not mere background. Hardy establishes a reciprocal relationship. Between the environment and the characters. So the nature is not mere background. There is a reciprocal relationship between the environment and the character. The natural world is described in the same way as the different individuals are described. So nature is one character. The nature is described in the same way as characters are described. Thus, the humans are not placed in a superior status than the nature. Human beings are not superior to nature. It removes a sense of authority from the humans. Man is king of creation. No. The authority from the humans is removed and it places the humans within the natural world. So humans is not superior. He is within the natural world rather than ruling above the nature. So the nature is given importance. Human beings are not masters, they are not rulers, they are part of the nature. The second characteristic that we must remember about Hardy is that Hardy believed in fatalism. He believed strongly in fatalism. Fatalism or determinism. What does it say? It attributes all actions and events to fate, to destiny. Everything happens because of fate. Everything happens because of destiny. Human beings have no freedom. We are powerless. Everything happens because of our fate and destiny. So he believed in this fatalism. He believed in this determinism. Everything happens because of our fate, because of our destiny. And thus he had a very pessimistic view of life. Pessimism. What is pessimism? Pessimism is a belief that this world is bad and that evil will prevail over the good. Pessimistic. Finding negative in everything. This world is bad and evil will prevail. Evil will win over good. A tendency to believe that worse things will happen. So what is pessimism? A tendency to believe that worse, bad things will happen. Now pessimists will focus on the negatives of life in general. So Thomas Hardy had a pessimistic view of life. This is another thing that we must remember. The lines from Shakespeare's play King Lear can be used to sum up Hardy's convictions. This pessimistic view of Thomas Hardy, we can summarize it using the words of Shakespeare from King Lear. As flies to wanton boys are we to the gods, they kill us for their sport. So these lines reflect the despair of Gloucester after being blinded by Cornwall and Regan in King Lear. Now there is no justice in the world. Instead of divine justice, there is only the sport of the vicious, the gods who reward the cruelty and delight in the suffering. So this is the pessimistic view of Thomas Hardy that is expressed in the words of the play by Shakespeare, that is King Lear. What was his idea of man? So we have talked about his idea of nature, we talked about his pessimistic view. What was the idea of man according to Thomas Hardy? Hardy depicted man as a tragic creature. Man is a tragic creature caught in the dilemma between his natural hopes and desires and the limitations of social structure which he has created. So he is in a dilemma. He is caught up between two things. Caught up between the hopes and desires, natural hopes and desires, and the limitations of the social structure. So man is a pathetic creature. So my dear students, we are coming to the end of this discussion on Thomas Hardy. As we said, Thomas Hardy is one of the most important later Victorian novelists. The most important novelist of the late Victorian era. We have talked about Thomas Hardy, we have talked about his novels, we have also talked about some of the characteristics, his views about nature, his pessimistic view and his views on man. For your assignment, dear students, please write a short paragraph on Thomas Hardy. Write all the novels of Thomas Hardy in the chronological order with their year of publishing. I'll also write some of the characteristics, a short paragraph on the characteristics of the novels of Thomas Hardy. Thank you for your patient listening. Hope to see you again soon with another lecture. Have a nice time.